Hey, this is Daryl from Snapcase, and you're listening to The New Scene.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The New Scene. I am your host, Keith, and we are back once again with a brand new episode. And folks, we've got a great one for you tonight. The one, the only, Josh English of Attempt Survivors. And we cover it all. We cover Josh's history in music. We talk about the wonderful 6 going on 7. We talk about Josh's travels all over the country for various musical pursuits. We talk about his exciting new band on Iodine Recordings, Attempt Survivors, excellent post-hardcore band featuring members of Seisha and Helmet. That conversation with Josh is coming up very soon. But first, folks, let's talk about us, huh? Support The New Scene in the following ways. Follow The New Scene on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at New Scene Pod. I am attempting to get us over 3,700 followers. And we did for a second, but then it dropped back down. And, this is how this goes. So if you're not following us on social media, do it. Follow our main and clips YouTube channels, full episodes on the main channel, highlights from our favorite episodes on the clips channel. Just search YouTube for The New Scene. Purchase our shirt at the Death Wish Inc. store. Head on over to the Death Wish Inc. store, search The New Scene. The shirt pops right up. Your purchase of that shirt helps directly fund this show, and we are very appreciative of everybody who has purchased a shirt so far. And of course, reviews. Folks, we are getting closer and closer to 100 reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So if you have not given us a 5-star review yet, please open up your app, hit the 5-star button, and if you write a nice review in Apple Podcasts, I'll read it on the air. And I'm going to do that right now because we have a new review from Jedediah859. Jedediah says, really, really great. 5 stars. The show's excellent. Keith's enthusiasm and ease of conversation makes it easy to become a fan of everyone he speaks with. Super interesting, fun show. Jedediah, thank you. Folks, you should be doing what Jedediah is doing. I mean, you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. If you like the show, hit that 5-star button. It helps out a lot. Thank you so much, Jedediah. And thank you everyone who has submitted a review. And folks, don't forget to support Iodine Recordings. Iodine just launched official merch for Orange Island. Head on over to the Iodine Recordings store at Death Wish Inc. to pre-order Orange Island's One Night Stay LP. Orange Island are an excellent post-hardcore band out of Massachusetts. Think Glassjaw, think Movie Life, think Thursday. That excellent post-hardcore sound that we know and love. Check it out. You want it, you need it. Nathan Gray and the Iron Roses have a tour kicking off November 28th with Clowns and Black Guy Fawkes. Head on over to Nathan Gray's website or Instagram to get those tour dates. And check out more Iodine stuff at iodinerecords.com. Awesome merch, awesome bands. Go check it out. Let's talk some music recommendations, huh? Why not? Now, folks, I don't know if you're on to the Greet Death New Low EP yet, but you have to hear this thing. There were 4 singles out. The last single, New Low, is out, and we know now that it is a 5-song EP. It's one of my favorite releases of the year so far. It's on Death Wish, another great label. Check it out. These guys can do no wrong. I've been listening to this thing nonstop, and I've been on a big summer music kick. I'm back onto the Mall Walker debut 4-song EP. We had the boys from Mall Walker on our show a while back. Check that out for some excellent, fun summer tunes. I'm still spinning Little Greenhouse by Anxious a lot, another great warm weather record. I'm still spinning Start Living by Hey Thanks a ton, another great warm weather record. Check out the debut from Hey Thanks if you haven't done that yet. There's a lot of great music out there, and it's almost impossible to keep up with it. And I love that. That's much better than having nothing to listen to. All right, so check back in with me at segment 3. I'll talk about how I'm doing, but folks, right now, we are going to speak to Josh English of Attempt Survivors. Enjoy. All right, folks, we're here now with Josh English. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. Nice to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here, Josh. You know, I've been doing a lot of research on you, and it is staggering the number of amazing bands and situations and various things you've been involved with. And we're going to jump into all of that, Josh. But first, a very important question. How are you doing today?
Oh, so far so good. Thank you. A little mildly overtired given erratic sleep schedule with being in the studio, but that's, part and parcel for that sort of stuff. And it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. And that's kind of a fun way to be exhausted, you know?
Absolutely. I feel like I'm here for this, singular purpose, and I need to sort of be all in. So a few hours less of sleep is a small price to pay,
Exactly. And folks, I was talking to Josh moments before we hit record. He is in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which, Josh, you told me is the home of Gorton's, of the Gorton's Fishermen.
Yes, according to the co-owner of the studio told me that today. Let me know. America's oldest fishing village when you drive in, according to and the Gorton's Fisherman logo, which I remember. It's so vividly burned into my brain from fish sticks as a kid, which I've not eaten in forever. That's like a reappropriation of the statue that sits at the front of the town. So that's a nice little funny thing.
That's amazing. I'm thinking about eating fish sticks as a kid, and it's mind blowing to me. I could never do that now. I just wouldn't.
Likewise.
What are you recording? What are you there working on?
So my friend Adam Taylor. He worked for years and years adjacent Paul Coldery, who Paul Coldery did a bunch of Radiohead stuff and Lemonheads and Hole and Peter Wolf and a lot of New England stuff. But his scope was wider than that. He was one half of a production team in the 90s, like Slade and Coldery, who did all these sort of, alt rock records, for lack of a better, description. And Adam, my friend, is significantly younger, but was his intern for a long time and did a bunch of stuff at these various studios, primarily at one called Camp Street. And when I kind of moved from doing the end of 697 and just sort of moving into trying to do solo stuff, I met him through his sister, and he's a phenomenal engineer. And we have a lot of similar musical touchstones, and also a lot of them that he's just sort of a music nerd all around, which I am as well, and love. And so sonically, we were constantly referencing things and sending each other things back and forth. And so I've done 3 full-length records and an EP with him. The last record I did solo was on the West Coast because I had to stay local. I was doing a collaborative thing, and it didn't allow for me to get back here. So now I'm back here. We just did 6 original songs tracked and a cover that I've been wanting to do that I'm kind of sitting on for something down the line. And now we're in the process of kind of banging out the overdubs piece by piece in the land of fish sticks.
Oh, nice. And when you record a solo record, what do you do? Do you do everything? Do you play drums? Do you play guitars?
No, I never play everything. I did it on I did a tour with Frank Turner in the UK, and for that thing, we each had to do 2 punk covers. In doing that, I played everything on those 2 songs. I did a cover of I Don't Want to Hear It, the Minor Threat song, and then I did a cover of Where Eagles Dare. And for those sessions, I recorded them with Adam, and I did, the drums. Everything was rudimentary on the drums, but I got through it. I hacked my way through it. But primarily, no, I love the feeling of a band. I love the band configuration. It's just, I found myself doing solo stuff because I wanted to continue writing songs, and it's really different vantage point trying to think about how do I get the right people to do the, at some point the process just becomes doing it. So yeah, anyway, so no, I've my friend Will that was in 697 is actually the drumming on this stuff. He's a phenomenal drummer, sweetheart, just has some of the best natural backbeat. And then a guy named Tony Goddess is playing some of the bass. He played in this band Papas Fritas. And I am playing some of the bass, and then Adam will probably play some stuff. We've got a guy named Lyle Brewer coming in to do some of the more technical guitar. I play like mostly the rhythm guitar, and I'll play leads on things that are like real heavily affected or whatever, just whatever I want, kind of, like whatever I can get through. But I like the counterpoint of having other people always. That feels good to me. You kind of feel like you're playing on train tracks sometimes when you play a lot of overdubs on your own stuff, or you singularly do,
Right.
So to get that push and pull of like real people and somebody else's vantage point, and they're, I'm kind of ensconced in this world with, where somebody like Adam goes like, oh, I know this guy and he's good at this. And I'm like, oh, cool. And there's an implicit trust there. So like, I got to play the EP we did 5 years ago. We had Dave Maddox drumming on it. Dave Maddox was in this band, the Fairport Convention, like a fairly big British folk thing. Played with Richard Thompson, and he also played with Ecstasy and Roseanne Cash. He played on the second Nick Drake album, Brighter Later, and one of the Paul McCartney records, lesser known. One of the, so having like that's the sort of person that he's like, oh, I know this guy, let's get him. Those are happy accidents that I'm always wildly humbled to be in the same orbit as those people. But more than anything, I just enjoy the process of like learning so much from those people, what they have to offer and how they approach things. And, and hopefully I can contribute something to that, to that soup and whatever. But, so that's how we're doing this one. It's a lot of like, we've got Will on drums, and then it's just kind of like a potpourri of whoever's around in the little fishing village.
Yeah. You would just hit people up. It's like, hey, come by and play this, or are you available to do that?
Yeah. I mean, we've got a few things that are set. I can play a lot of stuff if I have to, and then there's other things where I'm like, I really want like a real Keith Richards style solo on this, and I'm not going to get that. So can we get this guy, So
yeah. So did you grow up in Portland?
I did. I was born in San Francisco because my mom was teaching at the time, young married couple, and my dad was in graduate school. So I was born there and lived there early on, but like shortly moved back to Portland after he graduated and everything. And then, and that's where I lived, most of my relevant early years, until I moved to the East Coast. So,
and talk about growing up there. Did you discover the music scene there? Did you get involved with things there?
I mean, certainly not early on. My mom was a elementary, high school, middle school music teacher, depending on what era we're talking about. So, I was exposed to her stuff, but I also really like that was a real small. I grew up in this neighborhood, North Portland, which anybody that's from there would kind of know it, near St. John's. And I kind of like in close proximity, there was like a mini mart that I got my candy from. And then the other direction, there was a AM/PM/gas station. And across the street from that, there was a place called Everybody's Record Tapes and Video. And that place was like sort of the seminal landmark for me for buying everything from 45s to cassettes to CDs to, all of that stuff. So that was like where a lot of my initial purchases happened. And it was also it was like one half head shop, one half like video store, record store. So that was the one.
That's perfect. That's all you need right there. A candy shop and record shop. I would have been in heaven.
Both accessible, a little longer to the candy shop, a little closer to the record store. So that might be, if not for that, maybe I'd be, I'd be making taffy in a fishing village.
Did you move out to Boston to play in 6 going on 7?
I did. I moved out to Boston to play with Will specifically. Prior to even knowing James, I had a bunch of songs written. I was like, I got this demo from this stuff I was doing on the West Coast and this stuff. And it was as innocent and serendipitous as Will going, hey, I work in the deli with this guy. He's a good guitar player. And we kind of enjoy each other's taste and what have you. James, like, you want to play with him? And I was like, sounds great. And, we got in a room and just started working on stuff. And it just was, I mean, I think we knew in, 30 seconds, like, this is the right thing.
How old were you when you moved out there?
Oh, I was early 20s. So
wow. That's a big move. How did you know Will? How did you make the decision to go out there?
I had one semester of college with Will, and that was and then he moved back and yeah, in that time, it was just a natural fit. Like at that point in time, I'm probably way more into Northwest scene sort of stuff, and like punkier stuff, and all of the Portland iconic bands like Poison Idea and all that stuff, but also a lot of like the Pacific Northwest stuff as it extends to like Mudhoney or any of the sub pop bands, early bands, because being in close proximity to those places, Portland at that time was not Portland as it is today. It was not a destination city in the same way. And it was a West Coast flyover country city in a lot of ways. Even though there's a great history of music, it was a real insular place. And a lot of bands that I wanted to see that I didn't end up seeing live till I moved to the East Coast is just based on they would play, San Francisco, and then they'd go to Seattle,
Yeah.
And then later, now that's not the case at all, but then it was. And so I think by fortune of that, and like pre-social media and pre a lot of, ubiquitous internet stuff, it just sort of germinated this really interesting scene. And Portland's scene was, was symbiotic in some ways to Seattle's, but also very different. Like also, just far enough, 3 hours away. It's enough of a difference that it had its own thing too. So yeah, when I was playing music early on, like every initial incarnation of stuff, you're just trying to rip off shit that you like. You're emulating your favorite stuff. You're not.
Exactly.
There's no attempt at disguising your influences or anything. And
Yeah.
you may not even know. You're just trying to like go like, ooh, can I sound like that? Because that that gives me chills. Can I sound like that or try to sound like that? And then eventually, if I feel like songwriting was more like my sort of like longer term trajectory, that's what I really worked on, because that's what I'm, there are people everywhere that can sing better than me, play better than me, whatever. I just realized like where my strengths were and what I wanted to improve, and also kind of like what I enjoyed. And that was it. And so that, once you start doing that, then it's like if you want to be an author, you just, you read stuff and you refine stuff, and you want to have your own voice. You want to have something that like is distinctly you, that, that it's okay if that's polarizing. If somebody's like, this fucking is not my thing at all. Like, I can't stand this. Fine, whatever. Like, is there a reaction? Is there, like, do I have people that like it and people that don't like it? And, in the same way, I'm my own worst critic in so many ways. I'm cynical for sure, like everybody that lives in this world for any amount of time is, but I also I love hearing something that's like, how did I never hear that song before? I'm still just as thrilled by art as I was back then.
That's where you start. You just have to do it. You just have to keep doing it. You emulate the stuff that you love, and then if you stick with it long enough and you keep doing it, you develop your own style, and you're not just copying what you're hearing. Like, I've copied riffs that are almost exactly the same from stuff I heard, and I didn't even realize it. Same with lyrics too.
Sure. And it's, there's such a wide swath of stuff. Like, I'm doing this band project right now, and I named a song something that turned out to be, because it's a line or it's a little phrase from a song, and there's a song by the same name, and I want to ditch it because it drives me nuts. I'm like, no, I got to pull a different line from a song. It's got a different, and Adam, one of my bandmates, is, and old friend, is like, no, like, that's the perfect song title. You got to leave it. And I'm like, fuck, I don't, so there's that little push pull and those sort of things. But yeah, absolutely. Like identity, of some sort.
I was thinking about it today. There are bands that took iconic lines from other bands, right? But I don't know the line from the iconic band. I know it from the band I discovered. So I think,
oh, funny.
I think you just have to do your thing, and then it becomes your thing and people discover it through you. Now, I'm not saying go out there and steal whatever you want and just replicate it, but it's like, I don't know, you just build your own existence.
No, I mean, like, I guess the meta version of this is, if I'm going to name, a record, the White Album, or whatever, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, that better be a tongue-in-cheek reference or a cover album,
right?
Something like that. There are other things that are more like, they're vocabulary words, they're everyday words, and they're things. But I also really, really love. I've got a couple authors that I read voraciously, and people that I come back to over and over, because they teach me so much about language and words and all that stuff. And then I love, like, the Leonard Cohens and the Tom Waits of the world, or the Nick Caves, and some of that's the delivery of those lines. But a lot of times, like in the course of Leonard Cohen, it's like phenomenal standalone writing. It's great writing. Forget like its use in like rhyme scheme and like employed as lyrics. That's one of those people that like blows my mind, with some of the gravity of what they write.
Absolutely.
And I aspire to feeling that way, and hope, in a song, and trying to convey some of that, at the risk of that sounding super pretentious, which I'm sure it did, but that wasn't my intention. It's just, it means so much to me. Like, I get chills when I hear certain songs now, years later, and I'm all in, you know?
Absolutely. So you're in Boston. You are forming 6 going on 7, right? Now, what year is this around?
1995, we played our first show.
Wow. Okay. So you're in Boston in 1995. Now, this is a great time for music, and there's so much incredible stuff that has come out of Boston. Talk about some of the bands you knew and what was going on at the time.
Early on, I'm trying to think of who was around. I mean, that was certainly early Hydra Head era, like the beginning of Hydra Head for sure was one. Maybe the beginning ish of Big Wheel, although that I think is like slightly later, but roughly the same time, the beginning of Bridge 9. So the convergence of those three, that accounts for a lot of what was going on in terms of like, hey, if I had a peer, or whatever, or somebody that I knew or saw live, those tended, a lot of bands could have, or potentially were, or absolutely were on one of those three labels, if that makes sense.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so I remember, before I lived with anybody I lived with Kevin. I lived with Greg Latarte, this guy that was in this band, Opposition, and then he was later in this band Get High, which Kevin Rose sang for, and Kevin is now the bass player of Dropkick Murphys, but he's just sort of been he booked shows and he did things in the scene, and those, I was super into the DIY thing just in general, and met him and lived with those guys for a little bit, and then eventually met, I met, Jonah when he was in Only Living Witness, like pre Milltown. And then I met all the Cave-In guys and Brian McTurnan, and all of those things were like in this. Aaron Turner from Hydra Head, Rama from Big Wheel, all the bands that were around at the same time. And really there was no, similar to Portland, this is where it paralleled Portland, was there was no real delineation of like genre on shows at that point in time.
Right. And this was more common back in the late 90s. You'd have a very mixed bill. Even when I got into shows in like 1999, you'd have a really cool indie band with a ska band with a metalcore band.
Absolutely. And I think I think like, I don't know how objective I can be, but I think, from certainly my 2 cents, like that made for a very cool feeling time. It was almost like we're all in this together, and it, rather than something where if you didn't have the 4 on the floor breakdown, like that, nobody was going to get through your set. Like that was some of the joy for me of independent music, is kind of the joy of discovery, quite frankly, of like, you could go like, oh, I'm into this. And, like I used to love to wear black metal t-shirts on stage in 6 going on 7, and also death metal shirts, because I liked that stuff and I knew that stuff. Like, I loved Obituary from, I think, Tampa. And those were real things that I knew. It wasn't like a wink, wink, ironic thing. Like,
Yeah.
Cause of Death is a record that I love, So I think that was sort of indicative, like, of, people play one thing and they present one thing, but I guarantee you that all of these people, they've got a wider, a wider pull in terms of what they're incorporating.
You have a lot of connections to recent guests on our show. You were roommates with Brian McTurnan, right?
I was, yeah. Yeah, for sure. And
he was just on the show.
awesome.
You were 6 going on 7 had Heartbreaks Got Backbeat out on some records. That was Walter Schreifel's label, right?
It was, and then Brian and Sammy from Some and I did this project in 1998 that just, or 1999, whatever, that just came out called Forget. That was just us recording and like some songs over a day, basically, that Brian and I had worked on our couch when we lived together in Brighton. And Sammy came and played drums on them. And they were supposed to come out in Revelation years ago. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but it was something we at the time wanted to pursue more seriously because it was post Milltown, the band that he'd been in that had been on Warner Brothers.
Yeah, I had never heard Milltown until Brian reminded me of them when he was on the show, and I went back and listened, and unbelievably good. That's like the exact type of music I really love.
Yes, I really liked all of those guys that I knew. I only kind of, I knew them all, but I didn't really know Matt, the other guitar player, as well. But I lived with Jay, the bass player, and I lived with Brian, both together and separately. And then Rob, the drummer, I knew, and then Jonah, I knew from. I met Jonah like way before I met Brian or any of those other guys because 6 Going on 7 played early show with, or 1 or 2 with Only Living Witness, the band he had prior. And so for me, they're very much like a, and I mean this in the best way, like a New England AC/DC in that they did one thing. Like they had a thing that they did and they did it really fucking well. You know what I mean? So they're like, oh yeah, we got 5 new songs, like whatever, the next set you see them and they just very prolific. And it was a great time. It was fun. I lived with Brian and Jay both, I think, when they were making their major label record that never came out.
Is that record sitting on a shelf somewhere? Did they make it?
I think it's all available via like YouTube or one of these other things. And there were some songs like live that I loved that they're documented in those sessions. I think they had all sorts of issues with the producer, like I'm just giving you like my third person account. But like I said, I lived with them at the time. So they were at this big bougie studio spending all sorts of money with a guy who'd done some like Metallica B-sides and this and that. And he was just making all sorts of aesthetic or sonic choices that just were not, it's like he didn't hear the band that way that everybody else did.
So I heard another interesting thing, Josh. You were in a pre-ISIS band with Aaron Turner, Union Suit.
I was, and that's like one of those weird, so I played with a couple different people that in my mind, I never like joined, quote unquote, if that makes any sense. I don't know how much that matters, but I did, I knew Aaron through the Hydrahead connection and I knew Mike Poorman through a couple other things. And it was one of those things where I think they lost their bass player. I wasn't the first person there, but then I got in with them and worked with them a bunch on the songs. Like, we collectively worked on them is what I'm trying to say. And then we recorded them. And I think McTurnan recorded that, but maybe Mike recorded that. God, it's been anyway. But yes, I play on the Union Suit demo, which I think is the only thing that we ever did. And then I played some shows with them. 6 Going on 7 and Union Suit did a little run together where we went into Canada and played. And then I played some shows with Union Suit independently, like some basement shows, some very like appropriate, and then I think a show with Kiss It Goodbye, like a fun era of stuff. Cause I love that Dead Guy record, but that Kiss It Goodbye demo that came out after was killer also.
Yeah. And they relocate to Seattle, I think, once they started that band.
I think they did. And the drummer played, I think that's the drummer from Rorschach, if I'm not mistaken. But if not, it's somebody peripherally connected. And he played his drum kit facing like the wall, which is so badass.
Zayo used to do that too, and I didn't know why, but it was just so cool. And then I talked to we actually had Scott Mellinger on the show, and I mentioned that, and he said he had the drums turned that way just so he could hear himself playing. And I never would have guessed it was for that reason. I was like, oh, I thought there was just trying to be different or something.
But there's a real cool aesthetic to that as well.
There really is.
So there's some like external benefits visually. And the guitar player from that sort of iconic Detroit punk band Negative Approach, he does the same thing. he faces the speaker and he never turns around during the whole set. And he's got sort of like a helicopters-y, like wide stance and just rocks it out. Never acknowledges the band, just starts and stops all the songs with everybody, looks at the drummer, you know?
So 6 going on 7, you're together, you're touring. Talk about how things picked up. Talk about the band gaining steam.
Yeah, I mean, so the original set list, or the initial set list, was primarily songs that I'd written that I just had reference points for, that we played as a band, and, you know, added our own. I mean, there's a distinct, I'd played with Will Pryor, you know, like, even if that was a short time, and I just had this real organic connection with him. He's a phenomenal musical mind, a sweetheart, and he's got a lot of musical touchstones that I really love as well, that I didn't know many people that had. Specifically, like, we're both big, like, you know, Susie and the Banshees, Echo and the Bunnymen, Depeche Mode. We were always fans of that stuff, and, you know, there's nobody really that I knew that wanted to play with me that knew that stuff, you know. And even if those influences are not readily apparent, they're huge influences, and they're hugely things that that I still love. Jesus and Mary Chain, all that stuff. And so he just plays a certain way that feels really right. I know where he's going. In Excess, Tears for Fears, those are all bands that I love. And so when he played on this stuff, like, he just knows. And then, you know, and as we were pushing ourselves to get more creative and really do our own thing, we just had this idea that, like, we're going to do this thing, and whatever this thing is, whatever track we're on, we're going to push this and go with it. And James was very much the same way. He incorporated a lot of his own influences, but we just understood, you know, it was all about the song, really, more than anything, you know. So I felt like, you know, in every scene, there are people that are there with stuff, and there are people that are really, like, sort of second, third, fourth, fifth generations of, like, bands that were better, and they're making no effort to not, you know, they're about, like, the scene and not about songs. And you can be about both, you know. Anyway, so, like, you know, we'd play these, you know, we'd work on these things, and we really woodshed, because we recorded. I was trying to figure this out. So before we recorded with Brian, we recorded 2 separate demos, and then we recorded a demo with Brian, I think. No, 3 separate demos. Anyway, effectively, there's like somewhere between 7 and 9 unreleased 6 going on 7 songs that were recorded in real studios. And then we were gonna do, I don't remember, we recorded something with Brian. I think the last demo that we did was with Brian no, it wasn't. I think the 7-inch was the first thing we did with Brian, the Method Actor 7-inch. Anyway, needless to say, we had a ton of songs, you know, ready to roll in various stages of disrepair, and some that were really, like, locked in and solid. So when we did the 7-inch, I don't remember what the connection was, other than I think this is pre-Union Suit. So we did the 7-inch with Aaron. Hydra Head wanted to do it, and I was excited about that, because I knew that we weren't Converge, and I knew we weren't Cave-In, you know, but I felt like, oh, we sit with this stuff in that, like, you know, I like those guys. I like that stuff. And it was fun for me to have it not be identical. Like, none of those bands really are the same.
Exactly. That was Method Actor. That was one of the standout records on Hydra Head, because it wasn't heavy like everything else.
And it was also, but I think it's, you know, like, I mean, this might be like my lack of perspective, but I think it's remarkably heavy in its own way. And it's not heavy in the step on the distortion pedal heavy. It's heavy in a different way. And I think that was the continuity that Aaron might have seen, you know, in all of that. And, you know, and it was also early in the stages of the label. And it was labels like that, in the best way, like a Discord or whatever, they're documenting what's happening at the time. You know, we were playing bills with all of these bands in various forms and fashions. And it makes a lot of sense in that regard, if you have context for the scene then, you know? So I think we're number 10. I think we're like Hydra Head number 10, like 10th release. And yeah, we did that. And then I don't remember what had happened, but our next thing we were going to do was James was going to use a little money that he'd set aside to put out another 7-inch. And we had this song Deadpan Cool that made it onto the first, it's on Self-Made Mess somewhere. And then a couple other songs that we'd written. And we recorded those, and that was going to be the next thing. And then somehow the Walter, Sammy, Matt Pincus connection, the Some Records connection happened. I don't remember. Again, like this is, we're talking about like 1997, basically. So
Yeah, that's like what, 20 something years ago?
yes, long enough ago that it was.
I can't even count back that far.
So me either. My math was never good though. That's why I'm not rich.
Yeah, same.
But anyway, so that happened, and I know that so we ended up talking to those guys. They were like, "Oh, we want to put out a 7-inch," and I remember saying like, "Hey, like we're ready to do a record. We've got like songs. We don't want to do another. Because at that point we had done the recording of the songs that would potentially be like 7-inch number 2, for the band, and we just were beyond that. We had plenty of stuff, and we knew kind of what we were going to do. And and so we ended up doing the record with Some. And I know this is only funny, like in retrospect, because I remember like there were two, so Hydra Head apparently, I don't really know, because again, it's been years, but like one of the things I find funny is that there's one label in particular that claims to have tried to assign us. And I can tell you like definitively, like, no way. Like I had somebody give me and I'm not going to mention it because I don't, and I had somebody give me a card and go like, oh, like, hey, I work for da 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 da. Right. That's it. Like that's the entirety of the conversation. I remember I remember the show. I remember the person. I remember the card. Downstairs Middle East. And then who claimed later on, like, oh, we tried to sign that band. I was like, you never tried to sign us. Like,
Maybe him giving you the card was him trying to sign you, but he was like too shy to actually ask you outright.
No, definitely not too shy. But it was like one of those things that like in retrospect, the only reason that it stands out to me is because I was very like considerate and thoughtful, and there weren't a million labels banging down the door to sign us. Do you know what I mean? And so I remember like all of those things. And then I think I heard at some point that Aaron wanted to do a record with us, although I don't remember that. But again, it's been so long ago. You know what I mean? And also we didn't have a deal. It's not like we had like a 7-inch in an album sort of thing, but I would have happily done it with either. It was just like, it's sort of like what happens at the time and where you're at, and Some was this next step. And, so Some signed us, quote unquote, I'm sure there's a contract there somewhere. And, that was that, like the parameters for me was that I wanted to work with Brian because I like Brian as a person and as a roommate and a friend. And I also felt like, okay, he knows the touchstones we're going to go for on this record. We're probably not going to get a lot of time to do it. We don't want to like start the process and it's also kind of my personality. Like, I enjoy those relationships and just kind of, building on them, not everything has to be this new whatever. I would rather like a new batch of songs and like, ooh, let's try this on this record than like a whole new personnel.
Did Brian record Heartbreak's Got Backbeat?
He did. He recorded the 7-inch, Self-Made Mess, and Heartbreak's Got Backbeat. So
see, Brian has done everything.
He's done a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I discovered 6 Going on 7 more recently, and I think Heartbreak's Got Backbeat is my favorite of everything I've heard. I really like what's going on there. How did 6 Going on 7 fit into the scene and everything that was going on at the time? I mean, at that time, I had just gotten into things. I was an 18-year-old kid, and I only listened to like really moshy stuff or really poppy stuff. So
sure,
I was listening to Saves the Day and Newfound Glory, and then like Poison the Well and Dillinger Escape Plan. So it was one extreme or another. How did you guys fit into everything going on at the time?
I mean, I don't know. Like, there's no way for me to say this without sounding like an asshole. So I'll go out on that limb, and I'll say that I think that I was drawing from a wider influences at that point, and I think I was just I just like was in terms of 6 Going on 7. I just wanted to write good songs. I was less worried about like what everybody was sounding like or listening to or whatever, and for sure I was listening to plenty of that sort of stuff. But if it was like the hot thing to listen to, my instincts are kind of like steering away from that. Like, I don't want that to be an influence for me. Like, I want, like, so classic, whoever could be construed as like a classic songwriter, I guess, for lack of a better description, and or stuff that's like outside the scope of what's expected.
So you're like ahead of the curve in a way, because
I don't know that I am. All I was saying, or all I was getting at really was like, for me, there was a real conscious thing to go like, I really want this to be our thing, whatever we're coming up with. So there was a ton of us just rehearsing. I mean, we played in our practice space for fun all the time. And we were, and I'm neurotic as I'll get out. I'm sure those guys can, sign off on that, at the time, but I was pushing us constantly to like be better than we were. Let's try this. And those guys were all great, good enough, plenty good, and were showing me stuff all the time. So there was a real visceral joy in us just playing together and fucking getting after it and going, and doing stuff. And so I feel like, wherever we sat on the bill, like my goal was like, I want to be great on stage. Like I want to based on the songs, but also performing said songs. You know what I mean? And so I was real against covers unless I felt like we can do this as our own. Like this is going to sound like us, like people aren't going to realize that's this song until fucking 2 minutes in, and that's like, that was so identity. And I think the irony of that or whatever is you become some band's favorite bands and you never really permeate and you never become like the ubiquitous band that's like, you're the perennial opener for some of these bigger bands that I felt like, oh, like I think we have more of a voice than this band, but this band certainly fits into this time and what's popular and what have you. Having said that, we had a lot of great experiences with a lot of bands that did really well that I think had a lot to say. You know what I mean? That I really enjoyed.
yeah, and that's the thing. When I listen to 6 Going on 7, I love it. Everything that you're telling me, I can hear coming through because it doesn't sound like everything else. When I listen to it now, I like it better than the other stuff that I was listening to back in the day. However, I guess that's just the way popular music works in any scene. Like one band really hits, and then a lot of people are doing something similar to that, and that's what everybody's chasing. So it's like you can do that or you can not do that.
So you get, like you were saying, you get like your Saves the Day, and then you get 17 versions of Saves the Day that are not as good.
Yeah. When I was 17 years old, I really got into Saves the Day, and I would walk into a record store and say, what bands sound like Saves the Day? That's where your mind is at 17 years old.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the same thing, with all that stuff. Yeah. Like the same thing, you find popular bands that you like, and then you also go like, oh, who's in the liner notes that this band likes? Cause I like, I want to find out who they like or who they're thanking or whatever, and sometimes you love those bands and sometimes you don't, but that's your springboard for a lot of that stuff for sure.
So let's talk about where the band went. We released American't or Won't in 2001 on Doghouse. Yes.
Correct. Yes. And that the whole trajectory there was kind of an odd thing, but like the succinct version was, I think so prior to recording, Heartbreak's Got Backbeat, we were heavily courted by one major label. And then there were a couple others that were interested, but one in particular was really trying to sign the band. And I had like this lawyer calling me going like, hey, I want to be your lawyer, who had a convenient connection to the label, and all these like sort of weird things started happening. But I think that we ended up on Doghouse / Big Wheel, I think is kind of how it was. I don't remember how it happened exactly. Maybe it was only Doghouse in the end. But prior to that, we'd gone down to DC and done more demos with Brian. 3 songs, I think 2 of which are on American't. I love the versions of those ones we did. And it was one of those things where something transpired with, I don't quite know the total dynamic, but I'll give you like my take on it, because this is the years on take, right? That James wanted to do something else. He wanted to be with he was really pulling in the direction of like Jayhawks and like Americana stuff, like, these roots rock, Wilco-y sort of influences, and was frustrated with what he perceived as where he wanted to be and who he could get to do it, kind of, and that was like kind of my concession. And it was really, really, really like not a concession I wanted to make outside of going like, okay, I love these guys. We spend hours in the practice space together. And even though I have this relationship with Brian, or quite honestly, we have this relationship with Brian, you know what I mean? Like all of us, I got to be malleable enough to go like, okay, maybe we make a record over here. Maybe we do this, So it was like new label, new record, new producer, like all in one. And so there's the pluses and minuses of those things. The pluses being, we got this extra time in studio. I gotta do some things on the record that I'd wanted to try just time wise, specifically like, oh, I've got the time to try this and to fuck around and to do this. Not anything that Brian couldn't do so much as just like the time to do it. You know what I mean? This bigger budget doing the stuff. We did that one with Tim O'Hare. I think he'd just done like All American Rejects, which I was like, I don't care about that band, but that band's doing well, whatever. Like, I don't know that band, I don't like or dislike that band. It's just, it is what it is. It's like a mainstream pop punk band or whatever. He'd done that record. And, he had done some other things that I had liked. I think he had done maybe some Super Drag, which I like those guys a lot, as I like that guy a lot as a songwriter. Again, we played a couple shows with them maybe, but I don't know them. But, so we ended up with Tim O'Hare. We ended up at the studio called Fort Apache. I gotta use a Mellotron on a song that like David Bowie had used on something. It's just some cool shit, and there was like preamp gear or board gear that had some peripheral connection to AC/DC, all these fun little things,
I love that. Yeah.
But I love all that lore, and there's great lore with like the stuff we did with Brian on the first record. Like there's crazy stories about like where we were, what we did on Self-Made Mess. I don't want to skip that, but but you're asking about the third record. And so that was like one of those times where it was a little bit like the batch of songs. I had written more songs than we ended up tracking. And there were some democratic decisions about which songs went on that I was kind of like, okay, like you guys really like that one, like that we want to go with that one. And then it was a combination of that a little bit because Heartbreaks Got Backbeat for me was a very linear. It has a tone. It has a tone that goes through the whole thing. And if the first record is kind of an angry record, the second record is a real like sad record. It's a very and it was legitimately a sad record. Like all the songs seem to like make sense and be cohesive in that regard. And then the third record is kind of a mix of stuff, but it was also kind of like what we were doing at the time. It was a little, even though it's recorded wildly different than the other two, it's really kind of a mix of the two in some, like it's closer to the second one in a lot of ways, but it was also the evolution and like, oh, I want to kind of try like a Beatlesy song, this, whatever. So various degrees of success, but I really attribute a lot of that to two things. The sort of me not sticking to my guns and going like, I don't want that song on the record. We're going to do this song, and then also the production of it and like the sort of like too much time to like think and rethink guitar things and this and that. And ultimately I do better with like having to make some like hard decisions. Like, okay, I like this vibe check, like this feels great. Let's like stick with it. Like we can get neurotic and hang out all day and try all these things. And theoretically they might work, but at some point a record it's feeling, it's visceral. It's gotta be like, okay, that's the one, definitive. And
right.
So I think it was a little bit wayward there. And then on the personnel side or on the sort of internal side, James was really struggling. He was like 3 or 4 years older than Will, and Will's like a couple years older than me. And then James was a few years older than that. Anyway, he had decided like, this is, I'm not sure if I want to do this because we were getting ready to do a bunch of tours and all this stuff. We'd been offered like a weird run of shows with like the Goo Goo Dolls, like just, stuff that was like totally different level. And that was right before the band ended. We finished the show. We played our Boston show. And I think in retrospect, he probably had this, dialed in because we had tour to go after that. That was like a sort of like a midway stop, maybe even an early stop. I think it was at the Paradise we played this show. It was the record release for Americant, and James quit after that show. So it was like the swan song. We play in Boston. He's like, I'm going back to school, yada, yada.
And then that was it?
That was kind of it. He, like he said, like I'll call you. And I haven't heard from him in, however, since then.
You haven't heard from him since then?
No.
Do you want to?
I would love to. Yeah, like Will, I was the best man at Will's wedding. Will and I knew each other prior to James, but there was no great falling out. The only thing that I can point to is there was tension from the McTurnan situation because Brian was a personal friend of mine and James didn't really have that connection. It was more business with him. And I think that I felt like, hey, like this thing is good. Now we're starting to get some traction. Let's stick with this thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that, like this is, but that was one thing. And then I think the other thing is James really wanted to go off and do this other thing. We had this live guitar player that we incorporated specifically live. And I had this sneaking suspicion that guy was kind of like in it to play with James more than to play with the band a little bit, on some level. And then when he quit, I was like, he's going to fucking start a band with that guy. I know it. And he did. And, but it's funny because I kind of had mentioned that in passing or maybe even like multiple times, kind of like, hey, like you want to start a band with him, don't you? And he'd really like, no. Like, no. I want to, I'm in this. I want to be in this, but whatever.
It's like sneaking around secret girlfriends and stuff.
It was absolutely, it was like the secret band girlfriend. And so karmically, I feel like the fact that didn't do anything is probably, like the way it would have been for any of us.
Well, first, let me ask this. I mean, how did you feel after that? I mean, you have these big potential tours coming up and everything. Were you heartbroken? Did you want to try to hold it together with other people? I mean, where were you at with the whole thing?
So I felt multiple things. Obviously, like for sure, I feel like I had a lot less in my life at that point than James and Will in terms of just in terms of their focus and their priorities. They probably were more balanced, quite frankly, and probably still are. And that's why that's why I'm in, the land of Gorton Seafood making records still, but having said that, I don't want to conflate that with them being committed. It's not that. It's just like I was all in so many ways. Like this, it was defining to me. Like I don't, and it still is in a lot of ways. Like this means everything to me. I'm competitive in the way that I'm like dismissive of people that are like, oh yeah, like I used to play in a band. You're like, oh yeah, I used to play in a band, and trying to kind of like go, like, oh, I played music too. I always want to be like, no, not the same.
Yeah.
Not the same. You weren't like deep in your 30s, like sleeping on, the floor with your jacket over you because you crashed at somebody's house so you could, have money to get to the neck. You know what I mean? Like those are not the same parallels, and I know a lot of my peers that had those same experiences. So I'm not singling myself out from that. But I'm giving context, I guess, and so the band ends. And I was really like, I didn't really know because I loved those guys as people and I loved playing with them. And they all have such unique voices that I feel like it was like a Police, like, or any band where, there's no replaceable member. And I still feel like that. I remember that it was proposed that we get another guitar player and Carry On. And I was like, no, like I can't. And that was a Doghouse thing. They really, cause they had money invested. They wanted us to do this stuff. And I didn't see a path where that made any sense to me because there was so much creative, cyclical stuff going on between the three of us that felt we'd nurtured it, we put the work in, and that to me signaled, I guess the band is done. Do you know what I mean? It was just like there was no. I saw a path forward doing solo stuff. I saw a path forward like doing another band in which I could have played with Will. Or, or James, like, given any circumstance, but James was the one that quit, So, yeah, so that's just kind of where I was at. And then I had my girlfriend at the time, I just recorded these, sad sack fucking songs on her 4-track. And just like these, I was just like working through these like awful ideas. It's like I unlearned how to write songs just because I was so symbiotic with those guys. And, we just were kind of like firing on all cylinders, you know?
You have to start over in a way. Like I used to do this podcast with a co-host and he left to be able to commit more time to his family. And I felt like I had to start completely over
Yeah, yeah, for
and
sure.
learn how to be a solo artist, so to speak.
Absolutely. And frankly, I kind of felt like the motivation was there. Like I knew like I had the drive to do it, but because it wasn't coming at the pace that made sense to me, it was like I was consistently frustrated, you know, like I was kind of like finding my voice again in the context of like, oh, you know, like doing this and this. And so I ended up demoing a bunch of those things. I wish I had, I wish I still had that stuff. It's probably on a cassette somewhere, but, so that was that. And then so I moved to, New York after that because I was friends with, Alan Cage, who's a drummer of Quicksand. And he was like, he was in Burn and other stuff too, and Seaweed for a while. He was a friend of mine, and he had an apartment that opened up in Harlem, and I was like, oh, you know, he's like $400 a month. You want it? Like, I was like, oh shit, you know, like yeah, for sure. So I took it sight unseen because I'd never been there. You know, I'd been to New York, but I'd never been to his apartment, and I sort of the back and forth nature of the relationship I was in. We broke up, or you know whatever, you know we were off and off again, on again, that sort of thing. And I moved to New York and moved in with Alan and this guy John. He had two roommates that left at the same time, and my roommate John was one room. I got the other room, and Alan lived in the room he'd always been in. And so that was that. And I was just sort of like, I was working at as a photo retoucher for like a stock photography agency in Manhattan, and I was writing music and trying to kind of get different stuff going. I played a lot with Alan. We would just, you know, and we'd argue back and forth about like great songs and just like how, you know, like he had a drum kit that he would play like kind of muted we were on the third floor of a walk up of this apartment in Harlem on 136th and Lenox. So you're in Brooklyn, so I'm sure you've got some context for like Manhattan and all of the layout. So we were right across from Harlem Hospital. And that's the apartment I lived in with Alan. And then in doing all that stuff and finding out all that stuff, kind of writing, and, you know, I had a friend, Arun, who was living in Detroit at the time, who was like, hey, like, you know, he was going to Berkeley he went to Berkeley for a while, and he was a fan of Six Going on Seven. And that's kind of how I met him. But I always knew him to be like a kid playing guitar in his room a lot and not playing live very much. In fact, hardly playing live at that point, you know, like really just sort of woodshedding and doing his thing. But it was clear that like, that's what he was going to be doing. Like, you know what I mean? Like I saw the parallels, and I saw his like drive to do this thing, you know, and he'd been playing a little bit with this guy, Rodrigo. And so I moved to Detroit from New York to play with Rodrigo and Arun and this guy named Brett Fratangelo, whose dad was in Parliament Funkadelic. And his dad, I think his dad plays with Kid Rock now, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. But he's like a Detroit staple guy, like a drummer, whatever. And Brett was his son, phenomenal drummer, total piece of work, like, you know, like interesting character, like a character in the way that all great books have them. And so Arun and Rodrigo and I wrote these songs, recorded a few of them up in Canada, because that's a good like studio spot for like a lot of Detroit people, you know, at the time. And this band was Pale Throats was the name of the band. And we were really heading towards this sort of, I was getting a lot of like my Britpop influences satiated with this thing. We recorded one song, came out on one compilation in Massachusetts, but Rodrigo's played with a bunch of different people, as is Arun. They both play in Saves the Day and have for a long time, but they were playing in different things. And Arun now plays with Craig Finn from Hold Steady. When Craig Finn goes out solo, Arun's like the guitar player in that band. And he also does like cool shit. Like he wrote or co-wrote the theme song for this Middlemost Post, which is this Cartoon Network show that's by the creator of SpongeBob. So I played with those guys for a while, didn't last long, moved back to Boston, got asked to play in a few things that didn't happen. Like I got asked to play, I auditioned for one thing and I didn't get it. And then I got an audition for another thing and it didn't happen because the bass player who broke his thumb found a cast that fit, that he could go on tour and do that sort of thing. And so I learned all these songs and then didn't get it. And then when Six Going on Seven was around, we made friends with some of the Boss Tones. They liked our band and they had us play with them a couple different times. And I was working. This is 2003, four, somewhere in there, and I was working at this Newbury Comics related clothing store called Hootenanny that existed for a few years. And I helped buy some of I was really into like Merc and Lonsdale and all the Britpop sort of clothing, Fred Perry, all those things aesthetically. So I had been brought in to sort of help out with some of that stuff. And, I cashiered and just kind of did whatever. It was just like one of the million jobs I've had. And in that process, somebody that was friends with Nate from the Boss Tones, told him that I wasn't playing in something, or I don't remember, that I was back in town. He came into Hootenanny and asked me if I wanted to audition for the New York Dolls.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, of course, yes, absolutely. And he was talking to, I guess he worked for, I think it was called 10 Pin Management maybe at the time. And Arthur Killer Kane had just passed away and they were going to continue on with a new bass player. And so I got the opportunity to be on that list they had like 3 or 4 people in New York they were going to try out first. And then I was like in the sort of next tier or next holding pattern or group or what,
Yeah.
And so I fucking, on my lunch break, I ran up to Newbury Comics because it's literally the same building in the garage, this building in Harvard Square. And I bought New York Dolls Greatest Hits. I was like, I'm going to take this home. I listened to it the rest of my shift. And then I was like, I'm going to take this home and I'm going to learn these songs and I'm going to kill it. I'm going to be in the New York Dolls and, or I'm going to at least like kill the audition. And I started listening to all these songs, and I don't know how well the New York Dolls stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that sounds the same. They've got like a couple hits, and then a lot of songs that are like variations on the hit. And I was like, oh shit, these songs all sound the same. And I was like, so I nailed the hits, and then I was like, pulling my hair out, trying to figure out like what I was going to do, And then I don't remember how long transpired. Enough time that like had time to like rehearse the stuff for a bit, like let's say a week or less than a week. And they ended up taking, I think it was like Pat Benatar's or Joan Jett's like guitar player was going to play bass in the band or something like that. Somebody they knew from the scene. So I never even got the chance to do it, but I still have the thing and I got close. And
yeah, it sounds like you go where the music takes you. And I like that. You move to New York City, you move to Detroit, you're playing with different people, you're trying different things. And I think that's what you have to do as a musician. I mean, you have to go where the opportunities are, and the more people you're playing with, the more experience you're getting. And so, yeah, you also started a band with ex-members of Snapcase when they were on a hiatus. Tell us that story.
After that, Mike Porman, I think it was like, oh yeah, like the guys in Snapcase are doing this thing and they're looking for a singer. And I was like, oh, like I like Snapcase, it's like Quicksandy a little bit. And, it's got some things that I recognize, but it's also a little different. And it's got, it's upstate New York. It's got its own identity. And I liked how locked in it was and how specific,
Right.
And so I got these demos. I think the band at the time was called Ourselves or some the demo that I have anyway, and listened to the songs. And I was like, fuck, this stuff is really good, but there are better singers for this stuff. Like there are other people that will do this better. I know what this is. I've heard this before and I know I can't do it, like I can't, or if I do, it's going to sound funky. You know what I mean? It's going to make like a weird thing. So I think I sang over one of the songs anyway and sent it back, and they called me to do it, to come join. So I moved to Buffalo.
Oh, wow.
And I moved.
So you get around a lot, huh?
Yeah. I mean, like the Beach Boys, but less lucrative. Yeah. So I ended up moving to Buffalo to do this thing. And I think early on, like we'd had a conversation prior, and I think like sort of my one qualifier was like, I really want to write with you guys. I want like, let's start from scratch and do new stuff, cause I think we can let's like see where we go with that. Cause I wanted to at least entertain that idea. Cause I didn't want to do, like I'd done this thing with the thing that was that Forget was with Brian was post Milltown. I sang over demos they had, and like we were going to do a new band, and it was very like, the reason that Forget ended up being like a better thing, a better fit, like me, Brian, and Sammy, was that like it was kind of a mix of the two of us, whereas that other thing, was too much like a new guy singing over Milltown songs, and same with the ourselves stuff, or like the Snapcase. It was like, it wasn't Snapcase, but it was so similar that it was like a new guy singing over Snapcase songs, and I was like, well,
so it wasn't too different.
it was probably to other people's ears. It was to me. I was like, I hear so much of this in this, and I know that they can write songs, like I know that there's songwriting there. I think that they need to be with, like for me to, if they like what they're hearing from me, like we need to get like somewhere in the middle, closer to stuff.
Yeah.
So we wrote stuff and we had a hell of a time. Like we just, it was a lot of fun, and it was, we got there quick. So we did, we ended up getting multiple songs, but we had these 3 songs that we had dialed in, got a little small record person that wanted to put out like an EP or a 7-inch or whatever. It turned out being that 3-song EP. We went to Boston and recorded with my friend, Adam Taylor, who I'm recording with now. And so, Dustin, the bass player of like, that was in Threadbare and is in Snapcase, and Frank, who's in Snapcase, and Ben, who was the current Snapcase drummer, and played on maybe, or who is the current at the time. Let me clarify that. Current at the time drummer, not the original drummer. So Dustin, Frank, and Ben and I went to Boston and recorded this thing with Adam, and it was a lot of fun, and we were really happy with it. And then it got put out, and we played some shows. We played with this band, We Are Scientists. It was kind of like a current band at the time, and we played with a lot of we played multiple shows in and around sort of like Buffalo area, and we ended up playing. We played a show in New York. Played some other shows too. I don't remember, like a handful of shows. And then I was going to move back to Portland because of a lot of things. And then when I was going to move back to Portland, we had a lot of I was coming back, and I like ready to fly back and do all, kind of our writing sessions, recording, and everything, because we had gotten interest from multiple labels. We got an interest from management. We'd gotten a booker almost immediately who was going to put us on tour for forever, basically, like that was going to be the thing. And then Frank, the guitar player, there's a constant of the guitar players, decided kind of similarly to James that like, I got to go, like I don't know if I can do this all over again, like starting all over again, which is a very fair sentiment in retrospect. Because it's a life-changing thing in some ways, like even though Snapcase had success touring, they're kind of a known quantity. They knew who they could go out with, what made sense. It wasn't like starting over, for them. Like they had this thing, they could play shows, so even though Snapcase was on hiatus or broken up at the time or whatever, they had their thing that they did. They knew what their good markets were, where they weren't, what was worth their time, sort of. And me, I've always been a little more like, I got a sleeping bag, and, naively so, maybe, but also like you kind of need a little bit of that to go for it,
Yeah.
You need a little bit of like
you almost have to approach it like there's no other choice, and there isn't for many folks who do it.
I mean, there's, and so we had this opportunity to do this stuff. And so I was on the West Coast, and Frank kind of had a freak out and was like, I got to go back to work at the Apple store. And that was literally what it was, which I don't know. Again, in retrospect, to me is so funny, at the time it's like, oh, that's sensible, and then in retrospect, it's like, I don't know. It's just funny. So that was that. And I think there was Dustin and Ben wanted to continue on for a little bit, potentially with a different guitar player. But it was just like a lot of work, it's a lot of work to like do that. And at some point it was just like, maybe we just, maybe this is just it for this thing. And maybe you and I can write some stuff together down the line. You know what I mean?
So now we have attempt survivors. Josh, before you jump into that, folks, Educated Hips is the EP. It's going to be released on Iodine Recordings in June. So make sure to pick that up. And there's a single out now, Educated Hips, that's streaming everywhere. So let's talk about how this came together.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, so Adam Marino and I, like before I was doing solo stuff when I was in 6 going on 7, he was in a band called Aerotype 11 that was on the same label. And anyway, Aerotype 11 had, we were label mates. We were friends. We were both bass players. You know, we kept in touch over the years when I was doing solo stuff, and he had gotten married, had kids, started a business, had been writing stuff off and on, and I think for quite a while off and on, and had done bands post Aerotype 11, also Instruction and Godfire's Man, and you know, a bunch of stuff. But then he kind of quit music, for lack of a better description. You know, he just was like, that I'm done with that, and I'm just going to write songs in my house and, you know, raise my kids, et cetera, et cetera. So and focus on my business. So he was busy with a whole bunch of other stuff. And at some point it came to pass that he was working on this stuff, and they were considering different singers. And just like as a friend, I was like, oh, you know, shit, like I'll sing on it. Like, you know, like, let me hear it. Like, give me a shot, you know, let me see what we got, what we're working with, you know? And, he was just playing primarily with this, well, he was playing with all of the people that ended up in the EP actually, but it started out, I believe, with him and Kyle Stevenson, the drummer. And I think that's how they started stuff. And then he incorporated his friend Matt from New York and his friend Eric from Chicago through different bands, and they all played in different bands. And Kyle and Matt had played together. Eric had never played with any of those guys, but he was also, they all radiate from Adam. They're all friends of Adam. It's, you know, it's 6 degrees of Adam. Yeah. And I heard these songs, and again, like there were certain ones that I was like, somebody else can do this better. This is too metal for me. Like I appreciate it. It's really cool. It's not my thing, you know, or it sounds too much like Handsome, or like, you know, like I'd have reference points that I was like, I get that it's too much of an era for me. Let's try this or whatever, you know? And we just kind of like hashed it out. We did a lot of FaceTime stuff. I went down to San Diego, and then we'd go from San Diego to LA after Adam and I had played a bunch with Kyle. And we got to the point where we're like, okay, here are the 2 songs that make sense for this 7-inch. And we're going to go record them. And Adam booked time with Toshi Kasai, who's the Melvins sort of house engineer. And we went up to Burbank to record at Toshi's studio, and recorded Educated Hips and the B-side Follow Me Chaos for this EP that's coming out. So that was like the sort of first thing that we did. And it was a lot of fun. It was like, we tracked most of the stuff there, and then we tracked the bass was tracked remotely by Eric Abert, who plays in this band The Life and Times, which is a sort of side project or another project of Alan Epley from Shiner.
Yeah, I love that band.
And then, yeah, Eric's great. And then Matt had played in this band The Big Collapse, which was like a post-shift band with Kyle on the West Coast, or maybe East Coast, West Coast. And then he also played in this band Versus Antelope with Chris Daly. So Matt's one of Adam's friends, and I've never met Matt. I've never been in the same room as Matt. We're getting ready to go record a record, but that's the greatest thing. Like I'm super excited about all those guys. So yeah.
Yeah. I love what I hear too. I've heard the single. I love that. Think Jawbox, think Life and Times, think Shiner, in that pocket. I really like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I'm a huge fan of, kind of Discord as a general sort of like umbrella thing. There's a lot of stuff that I like about that scene and that stuff. I feel like these, to me, feel like very early songs in the context of where we pushed and where we're at now. But songs that I'm very proud of them. I like them still. But I mean, they feel like we wanted to get something down and out with some sort of momentum. We just kind of felt like, let's not like labor over the perfect, you know what I mean? Like there's these things to work with, this one and this one, like let's work on these 2, let's record them, let's get them out. Cause for me, doing music now for so long, part of it for me is like the process of like getting it done and getting it out. Like I just struggle with people that are like, I've been writing this record for 7 years in my house, like I've had this band and we've never done, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For me, I'm just like, you gotta like, you shit or get off the pot. Like you gotta do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so part of the process also is like you find your footing in doing that with those people, and doing that stuff. And so, so we've got the 7-inch coming out. I'm super excited. I'm super excited to play shows and support it, and also to make a record and give people like a wider sense of what we can do or where we're headed.
So what is the plan? Where is it headed?
Hopefully it's headed for a batch of good songs for a first record. That's my number one priority. And I think it's Adam's as well, and Kyle's as well. Kyle does Helmet otherwise. And so he does, that's sort of like either really busy or not at all busy, depending on what, time they're in. And then Matt does a bunch of other stuff outside of music, but has a real unique take on things. I really like his influences, and they're touchstones that I understand. And they're also ones that are totally, more on like the Zappa meets Jane's Addiction, like sort of wheelhouse, which I really love because he melodically, we have some nice interplay going, but it's not what I come up with on my own. It's great. Like it's a true collaborative thing, which I love.
Yeah, it sounds like you get involved and you want to be involved with piecing it together and the songwriting process, which I think is great because I don't know, if I'm working by myself, I might just write a song that just sounds like something else, or maybe that song might reach new heights if I'm working with other people rather than just working with myself. In recent times, I've been working with a band and someone will be like, well, let's try this. And we add a completely different part, or just the collaborative nature of things can really make it better.
For sure. And I think, like having done solo stuff for so long, I know what I do. Like I know what I do well in the kinds of songs that fit me doing stuff by myself. And then I also know, like, I think to some degree, and I'm constantly learning and trying to learn and get better. And also, but like what I do well in the context of various like configurations, like, oh, I see what they're doing here. Like I know where this is headed. We can do this. We can, just, I have no, I have collective ego. You know what I mean? Like I have like the collective ego, like I of the band, but for me, and I want to do my parts as well as I can. I don't want to like phone anything in, like I'm working. One of the things is Adam is, bugging me for like, put vocals down on this song. And I'm like, I got vocals, but I got 17 verses and we only need 3. So give me some time. I'm about to do this solo stuff. As soon as I'm done, I have to be like, I'm all in. I have to be in that. I have to finish it. I have to put my best stuff out there. And then I'm going to put my best stuff out there all over again for this next batch of things as we work on refining all these things. I need that separation because I don't want them to, it's all the same thing. Like, it's all, we're trying to write the best songs we can.
So you can't be like recording the solo album and then jump over and do an Attempt Survivor song and then jump back. It's got to be like your energy goes into one project and then the next project.
I can, but I think that I'm more successful if I'm hyper focused on the task at hand, because I know the level of playing that, like that Kyle has and Matt has and Adam has, or like, where the standard they hold themselves to, and there's continuity there. We're all there. It matters greatly to me, and, so I want to be done. I want to put all my energy into these songs that I've written for this EP because I'm really in love with some of this stuff and I want to get it out there. And I did a cover of a song that I'm keeping under wraps that I'm super excited for people to hear because it's a local band from the era I was in. And I've been sitting on it forever and we finally did it. And I'm fucking super stoked. And I can't wait for that to come out. And then this EP. And then I've got like this sort of 8-week break or a little less to work on all these ideas that we have been working on now for a year with the Attempt Survivor stuff, but really hyper focus on them and go like, I can do better than that. Okay, that's cool. That's a keeper. Next, just kind of like work on, meta, just break it all down and then get ready to go to Baltimore and record, in July.
So we were talking earlier, you mentioned that there was some studio lore with Brian McTernan while you were recording Self-Made Mess.
Oh yeah, man. There's, with all the records, there's some like little funny thing, but and I've told this story before, But this one in particular is funny to me, just based on, I grew up in North Portland, and kind of as I was discovering, the Depeche Modes of the world, and Prince and all that sort of stuff. It's very much like that neighborhood historically was very much like a, for lack of a better term, sort of like white trash neighborhood and area of Portland. A lot of metal, a lot of muscle cars, a lot of like dudes that liked hockey and looked like they were going to beat me up and probably would have, anyway, so it's funny that like in all that, somehow, we got signed to some, we're going to go make this record. And there's some like management share thing, like the labels are always hustling, like, oh, we've got this connection here. We've got this, and it's no different on an indie. It's all, it's all who, and like what, and somehow Skid Row and I think Quicksand shared management. And Walter was like, oh yeah, like Dave Sabo's got a studio in Jersey, and he'll let us use it for X amount of dollars. And, it was like within our no budget kind of,
Yeah.
So we went and recorded Self-Made Mess at Dave the Snake Sabo from Skid Row's house, basically his basement. And, you enter through the garage, and the garage is just like full of like gear and snares and amps and, guitars and what have you. And then you kind of make your way in, and there's like the tracking room and a little hallway. And then there's the door up to his house where you're never supposed to go up there. And then there's like the live stuff in the back room that was like the, loungy area. And so we recorded Self-Made Mess in a really short amount of time. And like the tape machine kept breaking and all this shit happened. But like maybe a day, we were told like, like Dave lives up here. Don't go up the store. Like, don't go upstairs, like stay downstairs. We stayed in the studio. There's a bathroom, there's a shower, like we did all that stuff. I slept actually literally under the control board, under the mix, the mixing board in a sleeping bag. And then I think some of those guys slept in the other room. We slept all over the studio. Like maybe a day or two into the tracking, probably the second day or whatever, he kind of came down and was bobbing his head. He's like, hey, I'm Dave. And, and then befriended James and Will, took him out to play pool in Jersey while I was tracking vocals, took us upstairs to see all his like gold records from, Pantera and all this other shit. And, it was just funny because, growing up, it's like, of course I know who Skid Row is, that's like a really funny connection. And he had great stories, told us some wild stories, from like the height of the band, just like, dirt level stuff.
Yeah.
Referencing the Motley Crue book, just like crazy stuff that you're like, wow, wow, what a surreal life, but, he had, above his like grand piano in his house, he had, the Slave to the Grind cover. If you know what that cover is, it's like this sort of painting, like fine art painting. He had that painting like above his piano. It's just like weird little stuff, but mostly it was just like a cool thing. The snare that's on Self-Made Mess, if I'm not confusing this, I'm pretty sure it's a Black Beauty snare. And I think it was the snare that was on November Rain that they had bought.
Oh.
That they had bought from Matt Sorum. Anyway, like
wow.
Cool shit like that, and then like I lost my voice because the tape machine kept breaking, and Brian was like, shit, dude, like we've got like a day and a half to track vocals for like 9 songs or 8 songs left. You know what I mean? So I totally blew out my voice doing that. And in doing so, Dave was like, hey man, like Sebastian Bach's never coming back. Like you can use any of his stuff. Here's his case. So I used this little throat spray called Performer's Secret that was Sebastian Bach's, to make it through the Self-Made Mess sessions. It just like, like little funny things like that. Anecdotal.
It's amazing, like just how everything comes together, different generations of bands, different scenes, all that stuff.
Dude, it's such a, like music, and the longer I've lived and the more I've been in like, music and it's connected, the peripheral connection to entertainment and all these things, I've got all these friends now that are doing these things all over, and it's just so funny and surreal and enjoyable for me, but still for me, man, like all I want to do is write songs that I can have people that I respect go like, man, I really like that song.
Absolutely. So let's recap. Here's what we want to do, folks. Number 1, if you haven't heard 6 going on 7, you have to. I mean, it's a great band, right, Josh?
I'm very proud of my time with that band, and specifically the era you mentioned, like Self-Made Mess era is, Heartbreak's Got Backbeat era is like my favorite. I feel like it was the most cohesive record, but those records are very, very close to being reissued. So all the stuff that you cannot find now because it's been out of print for a long time, and the Spotify sort of catalog of said records along with demos and some other cool stuff we're around the corner from that happening, I think, in 2022.
Oh, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that. You have solo albums.
Yeah, I've got solo records. I have 4 solo records, and I'm going to release a single, a cover. I did a cover of Purple Rain for this cool benefit thing that is yet to come out, but it's a cool cause. And then I've got this cover that I'm recording that is potentially set to be a B-side of a 7-inch, but for sure will be digital. And then I've got an EP coming out after it, and then we go in and make the Attempt Survivors record kind of like right around when the Iodine 7-inch comes out, just to kind of keep the ball rolling.
Excellent. So yeah, let's check out the solo records. Let's check out Educated Hips. That EP is coming out on Iodine Recordings in June.
Absolutely.
And then we have an LP to look forward to as well.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited. And folks, I hope all of you are too. And Josh, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come on the show tonight. You know, you've done so much and there's more coming, and I'm really looking forward to it. It was great talking to you. So thank you.
Likewise, man. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully I had a lot of fun talking.
There you have it, folks. Josh English. Really happy that I got to talk to Josh. That was an excellent conversation. I can't wait to hear more from Attempt Survivors. I love the 2 singles they have out now, Educated Hips and Follow Me Chaos. I'll have those on our playlist, our Spotify 2022 playlist. So check that out if you haven't heard it yet. And I mean, the guy has just done so much. 6 going on 7. Excellent band. Can't wait for those reissues. The amount of traveling that he's done all over the country, pursuing various different bands and musical projects. And, you know, I've talked about this with various musicians. That's what you got to do, really. If you're in this, if this is what you do, and if you really love it, you just pick up and you go. He moved to Detroit. He moved to Buffalo. He moved to New York City, all over the place. And I really respect that. You know, whenever I talk to a musician and they can just pick up like that and go with no fear, I think that's incredible, because that I could never do it. I could just never do it. So props to you, Josh. He's done a lot. He's doing a lot. And it was wonderful to talk to him. Thank you so much, Josh. All right, folks, let's check in. How are we doing? It's been a very steamy weekend here in New York City. It is 4th of July weekend. So happy 4th to anybody who celebrates. It's been hot. It's been humid. I hate air conditioning, and I've had to use it several times this week, and I just don't like it. I don't like it. It's loud. I can't hear what I'm watching. I turn on the air. It gets too cold. I turn off the air. It gets too hot. I turn the air back on. I hate it. It's a never-ending, uncomfortable cycle of madness, and I like to have the window open. I like to have the window open all day and fresh air blowing in, but this unbelievably hot, humid weather does not allow for that. But listen, on the more positive note, it's been a beautiful weekend. I've done a lot of fun stuff. I was hanging out in Tompkins Square Park in New York City Saturday. And for those who live here, or those who have been there, you know it's always a scene there, and it was great. I was with my friend Robert. We're sitting there talking to all the various New York City characters that walk by, and feeding squirrels, and watching drug deals go down left and right. Guys riding by on bikes, offering weed for sale. It's a real scene down there. It's a real scene, and I love it. Today is Sunday as I record this. I went and visited my parents. I haven't seen them since Christmas. They were really happy to see me, so we grilled, we hung out, we ate. I watched Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, which were on TV. They bring out all the hits for these holidays on cable, so that was nice. It was great to see them. And now I'm back home recording this podcast, and I'm feeling good. Nice weather, good times, really don't have any complaints. I mean, I hope everybody out there has had a great weekend and is doing well. I'm doing great here, and that's it. That's it. We've got a lot more exciting stuff coming up guests you wouldn't believe. If I read you our guest list right now, you wouldn't believe it. You would unsubscribe from the podcast because you would think I was lying. It's that good. I can't wait to bring you all of these episodes. I can't wait to bring you additional content. Speaking of, as you listen to this, folks, I will be doing a live stream on Twitch. If you have Twitch, follow me at the New Scene and come drop in. I'm going to be playing Doom 3 sort of for the first time. I played maybe half of it in 2012 and then just stopped because my computer died or I got distracted. I don't know. So I forget the whole thing. I'm going to be playing it live on Twitch, July 4th, 12 p.m. Eastern, until as long as I can stand. I don't know. I'm going to try to go till 5 p.m., but we'll see. So if you're on Twitch, come by, hang out. It'll be fun. And that's it. So folks, we're back with a bonus episode this week that's going to drop Thursday. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I'm going to give you a hint. I will be celebrating the 25th anniversary of a classic record we know and love with a member of this band. See if you can figure it out before then. But I'm back again this week, Thursday, so I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Thanks everybody for listening, and until next time.